Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would like very much to continue on with our discussions of the feature films of that great filmmaker artist who is Brian De Palma. And that brings us to a film which was released in 1972. And this is a Warner Brothers film, so it is considered to be a quote-unquote Hollywood production, and which is also very significant in the context of Brian De Palma's career as we find it here in the early 1970s. The film I'm referring to is this, which is Get to Know Your Rabbit, which stars Tom Smothers and John Astin, and features also memorable appearances by, for example, Catherine Ross and Orson Welles and Alan Garfield and others. So this is a film that, again, we will speak about a little bit more detail, a little bit more spoiler-ish detail a little bit later in this video. But for now, for those who have not seen this film yet, and if you are interested in the works of Brian De Palma, this is a film that is considered to be, again, it's often regarded in the context of De Palma's career, his filmography, to be his first, say, entry, his first foray, his first dealing with a Hollywood production. And so there is a bit of what one might call somewhat troubled production history between him and, say, the studio side in terms of creative control, in terms of how he was perceived as an artist. At least that's how it's reported, and that's how it's often discussed. And be that as it may, and whether or not, even in those circumstances, in those contexts, one might question whether or not this is indeed a quote-unquote bona fide Brian De Palma work, be that as it may, I think we still identify and recognize a number of things, a number of traits that can be said to be very consistent with the works of Brian De Palma that we have seen thus far and that we might see again in subsequent De Palma directed films. And also, I think, as a film itself, I think it has that zany comedy quality. It is a film which is about, it is a type of comedy sketch episodic structure with various characters that come in and out of the scenarios of the tapestry, the cinematic tapestry, encountering our main character. This is the Donald Beeman character, who is portrayed by Tom Smothers. So he is the focal point, or our line of currency that we follow from his immediate or the introductory situation involving his corporate world position and status, corporate world executive status, but then deciding very early on to leave that behind in order to pursue a tap dancing magician career of some sort, or endeavor, or pursuit. And with that, various hijinks and comedic scenarios occur. So that is the basic structure or setup. This has an element of comedy. It is not necessarily a quote-unquote Brian De Palma thriller per se, but it is a Brian De Palma comedy. And in that way, it is also a Hollywood comedy. And as we will see in subsequent films, we will see, or we might see, Brian De Palma working within the Hollywood studio system or Hollywood film production apparatus to make various films that will be, again, very significant in the line of Brian De Palma's filmography. And in that way, one can say that Get to Know Your Rabbit is, in one sense of that sort of cinematic filmography perspective, very significant indeed, as well as the themes and the tone and the way in which things are structured, as well as certain camera tricks and the like. And we'll get to those details again in the second half of this video. So for those who have not seen this film yet, I will be talking about specific details of the plot and spoilers from now on. So if you're not interested in hearing that right now, if you haven't seen it yet, you want to see it, I don't want to spoil anything for you. So I encourage you, for those who haven't seen it, to stop this video now. And you can always come back to this video at any time. It'll still be up on this channel after you've seen the film. And then we can talk, you and I, together about this work, again, from 1972, which is Get to Know Your Rabbit. Okay, so you're back, which means that it's okay to talk, you and I, about some details and some specifics about this very intriguing work, which is Get to Know Your Rabbit. The camera work or the cinematography is John A. Alonso, so let's keep that in mind. And let me start with the camera work because I think we opened the film with a very intriguing shot, do we not? We see we see our main character played by Tom Smothers, and we see another very significant character who is John Astin's character. So this is Turnbull, on one side, each side of the frame, in some kind of corporate-looking office setting, a hallway or an office of some sort, interior, and the goings on and the sounds indicate some kind of busy office goings on. So, but if you look immediately, you can see that they look like they're in the same room with Tom Smothers on one side of the screen and John Astin on the other side of the screen. But after some seconds pass and there's a dialogue that is exchanged, they go in separate directions. And when they go in separate directions, already we see that we were dealing with a split screen that was split down the middle, and it was split down the middle over the area of the rooms, respectively, where there was this, I think, wooden panel on the wall. This maybe mahogany colored wooden panel on the wall, which is again a trick. It's like a cinema trick. It's a magic trick in many ways because it was an optical illusion in a manner of speaking, because it looked like one shot. At least to my eye, it looked like one shot. But then when they walk away in separate directions, John Astin and Tom Smothers, you realize that the cameras walk away and then the perspective skew, such that you can see the line and divide, and thus we understand that this was a split screen. Fascinating for a number of reasons, right? So first of all, it is a magic trick or a optical illusion, and if we know the film, we understand that this is a film that is about illusions and magic tricks, or the putting on of magic tricks, or the appearance of magic, or the performance of magic, because of Tom Smothers, what he does immediately after or soon after the scene. He essentially walks away from his corporate life, abandons it in favor of a more sort of liberated, almost carefree lifestyle that involves learning about magic tricks from D'Alessandro, who is the great Orson Welles, or taking those classes and then going on the road and then eventually becoming famous, and indeed rich and famous, to the point where he seems to come back to the point where he started, namely in a position of type of corporate influence or executive authority and power. And his choice, which concludes the film, is a nice parallel to where we find at the start of the film, namely, again, abandoning this corporate life for a sense of freedom and liberation, quote unquote, out on the road, as it were. So, but already, so we have this idea of the magic trick or the illusion that's opening the film. And also, too, if we recall Brian De Palma's work up to now, and also films that we might see subsequent, we know that, or we can understand that the split screen effect or the split screen presentation for various scenes is a very important tool or device of style, camera style and visual style. And indeed, this is, I think, an example where we see style linked very closely with a strong theme of the film, namely the split screen linked to the notion of optical illusions or magic. And this is a film that, if anything, is about the idea of capturing the illusion or capturing the magic in a manner of speaking. So already off the top here, we've got a very fascinating situation indeed. And we have the chaos of the world. Tom Smothers seems to be in the center of this world where everything is chaotic. People are trying to get at him or ask him questions or get his advice, tell him about a call or get a signature on some document or something. And then he decides, of course, to leave it behind. And we have that shot. It's a long tracking shot, which is a part of the credits, or part of the first part of the credits anyway, in terms of him going through the corridors from the office to the elevator, and then we assume out the door and out the office. And so all along the way, we have ideas of various little episodes or stories going on. For instance, the idea about someone calling in about a bomb or explosive, and then this brings him later to his own apartment, which has this very bravura shot overhead from him in bed with a young woman going to the door, answering the door, and going through corridors and corridors of his own apartment or his own living space and answering the door there. So already we have two things going on here in terms of craft and in terms of a type of link to or style linking to the themes of the film. So In terms of style, we have this long shot through the corridors in terms of the leaving the office. So that could be said to be something of this long take process. And we might see, or we have seen, or we might see in subsequent films, the way in which De Palma employs the long take to great effect. And here it has a type of leaving the carnival, or leaving the chaos, or leaving the maze of the corporate world, and then out into the open. So there's that aspect too. So it's a style linked with the type of thematic substance. And this style linking with thematic substance can also be seen in the latter half of this situation, where he's, again, the overhead shot with him in bed, with with the young woman Paula, and then we see him going and answering the door. And then the camera tracks from overhead. Again, we have the way in which the camera seems to be almost all-encompassing. It seems to almost break walls. It seems to be breaking the sort of physics of nature, as it were, for the sake of capturing the world. And here we have not just an overhead shot that's very impressive, and it carries us through on one take, from him in bed to through the kitchen, through some kind of living dining area, all the way to the front door in this sort of vertical space. We also have the way in which he traverses that. There are moments where he goes, and it's almost like a maze through that space into the area. So again, the style is linked to the thematic substance. So we also get a sense that maybe there is a type of enclosure or claustrophobia that's still involved with his attempt at liberation. And indeed, when we see him starting with, in one situation, going through this space and then ending up at the front door. So in this way, this could be a type of trajectory of how the film will go. He starts in an enclosed space, tries to go in and out of various, say, corners, and then leading to some kind of conclusion, which is kind of like a map of the film itself, in a manner of speaking. So style equaling thematic substance. It's really brilliant. And then going through with the other aspects of the film, again, this is a very episodically structured film. We have many characters that come in and out that seem to be encountering him, and then they disappear, and then they recede into the background, maybe to be never seen again, or maybe they come back, who knows. And so this is all about the journey of the Tom Smothers character, the Donald character, as he leaves his life and then tries to meet other people. It seems also to have an element of what one might call, for lack of a better phrase, a type of counterculture type of quality to it, leaving one aspect of, say, the corporate world, and then going into a state of essentially freedom to meet new people, which Donald does, the Tom Smothers character does. He does meet a number of people. He gets into various say, intimate situations with, for example, some of the women that he meets, and he meets a number of women along the way. He also meets various other characters, like Alan Garfield character, and also specifically I mentioned John Astin's character, which is has its own type of trajectory and own type of, say, comedic character arc that goes from one area to the other area and back to another area indeed. So, and the interaction between John Astin's character and Tom Smothers' character, it forms one of the cores of, say, the comedic timing and quality, and sort of the bouncy, irreverent, and fun, bubbly, jubilant tone that can be said to be part of the film, Get to Know Your Rabbit. Speaking of the rabbit, this also brings into play the magic, the magician trick, and the training and the practice quality. And of course, we have the appearances of, well, before we get to that, I shall mention too that in addition to those appearances, we have also appearances of, say, Catherine Ross, who has a very memorable role, and as we get to know her, we also have, again, that episodic structure, certain comedy sketches involving various people that we meet. So that's definitely true for example, the Catherine Ross character. It has a very interesting way in which we meet her. We get to know a little bit about her backstory and her interests and what she has done, and then if at all, how that transforms into some kind of possible relationship that will carry us through to the end of the film between her and Tom Smothers' character. So that's another example of the comedy and the episodic comic sketch nature of this film. One of those episodes is, as I was referring to a little while ago, the rabbit and the magician's trick and the tap dancing magician trick practice school, and then the meeting with D'Alessandro, who is of course portrayed by Orson Welles. Now, this is one of the aspects of the film that I think is considered to be quite memorable. Indeed, there are many memorable moments. I think there are many memorable elements. One of which being the appearance of Orson Welles, and when he's on screen, he has this really towering presence. And it's a very funny presence too, because the character that he plays, D'Alessandro, has these moments of whimsy, has these moments of almost a type of what's the phrase? My words I'm escape me for a moment, but yeah, he almost is unsure of his surroundings. He has this way of being almost oblivious to the comic and ludicrous nature of the situations regarding which he is involved. So that provides a lot of the, I think, comic elements to it, as well as, of course, the appearance of this cinematic legend, this artistic legend that is Orson Welles in the film that is directed by Brian De Palma. So in many ways, we have two cinematic artists, two legends that are intersecting at this point, Get to Know Your Rabbit. So a very fascinating aspect of that indeed. Plus, we have, too, the notion of magic and magic tricks. And for those who know the works of Orson Welles, you know that magic is a very key part of Orson Welles' own cinema filmography and his own cinema art. So the illusion and the optical illusion and how that is linked inextricably to cinema. And indeed, we see how that is played or turned on its head in this film. We see how it's almost like we see how the trick is operating, what the explosions, what they are involved, the type of illusions that are actually quite simple in construction, or maybe they aren't illusions indeed, but they're just examples of hard work and practice, and also they have a link to comedy, to sexuality, to sort of this type of broad humor, physical humor, etc. So it's all linked, and I think that's also a reflection of, say, the sort of the bubbly personality as character presence that the character portrayed by Orson Welles gives to the screen. So that this adds to the comic levity and the feeling of a type of jubilant or joy that we see going forward in this film. So I think overall, what we have here is also we have a film that could be said to be charting the American dream from a type of corporate structure down to a totally different environment, and then back to the corporate structure again. And then maybe we have the denouement of the film, which is a nice type of parallel structure. So we have the American dream charted against the backdrop of this zany, wild, strange comedy that is also very much about the charting the American dream, from rags to riches, or the idea of liberation or freedom, culture, counterculture. I think it's very much part of the Americana landscape of the 1970s. So in those ways, too, this is a very fascinating and indeed significant film in the context of De Palma's filmography. Now, as I was alluding to earlier, and you can find more information about this as you continue on your own journey and your own research regarding your De Palma cinema journey, you will probably find that, yes, this is not usually regarded as being maybe one of the great highlights, if you will, of De Palma's filmography, especially when we get to some other films, or when we consider some of the films that came prior to this. And also that might have to do with the sort of friction that has been reported in terms of Brian De Palma versus the sort of the studio or the Hollywood machine, Warner Brothers, and some of the big players that were involved in the cast and crew, etc. So all in all, this might not be seen as a major work in the context of De Palma's filmography. Even if one feels that way, I do want to suggest that it does, for the reasons I've tried to suggest here, link and sit very comfortably within the context of De Palma's filmography in terms of style and substance. And also, when we talk about substance, and we recall that Brian De Palma is also very much a filmmaker that is not just a filmmaker of quote-unquote thrillers and type of suspense thrillers, but he's also a director and filmmaker and artist when it comes to comedy, when it comes to this zany comedy. And indeed, we might see other comedy or comic sketch type of films going forward. We also saw that type of episodic comedy, did we not, in discussions of other works like Hi Mom and Greetings. So it has that same tone and feeling and flair to it. So in that way, it feels very Brian De Palma-esque, while also having a type of subversive cheekiness to it, in terms of, say, the corporate world, in relation to ideas of uh, um, going out on the road, feeling of freedom and liberation. There's an interesting parallel we might see, for example, with this film and maybe a later film that we might see down the road, which is called Bonfire of the Vanities. So, in many ways, I think when we talk about Bonfire of the Vanities, we might think about the possibility of, say, a nice double feature of Get to Know Your Rabbit and Bonfire of the Vanities, in terms of that film too having a sense of the corporate structure, the corporate world, and how our main characters in that film try to deal with and traverse that landscape, especially when it seems to be ever changing and there seem to be many various, say, pitfalls with regard to that. Here, there can be a similar type of apparatus structure at work. One of the many elements, as I say, in terms of the portrait or a depiction of this type of 1970s Americana in the hands of the director Brian De Palma in this way. And then finally, too, I mentioned the intersection between De Palma and Hollywood. There will be other examples in De Palma's filmography where we will see more intersections, more collaborations, shall we say, between De Palma as the artist, the filmmaker, director on the one hand, and then the Hollywood machine apparatus on the other hand. And maybe in a film like Get to Know Your Rabbit, maybe where in this sense it has been reported and discussed and generally regarded as being a relationship that was somewhat that somewhat had some friction to it, but we might see other examples where that relationship might see relationship that are more maybe how should I put, more happy, and then they yield results that might be said to be quite commercially and artistically successful indeed. So we might see those examples down the road, but for the time being, and in conclusion, Get to Know Your Rabbit, yes, it does sit very comfortably in Brian De Palma's filmography, I would say, for the reasons I've tried to suggest here, while also, again, being an example of the Hollywood zany comedy, the type of sketch comedy which does have its own sense of irreverence and flair and wit and style, which I think is very nicely captured in this film, which is Get to Know Your Rabbit. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies, including Brian De Palma movies. So until we see each other again at the next one, be well and cheers.